on stage Grantham. I will have it here, poems, Jeet Thayil in conversation with Esterino Adami.
Hello everybody, real pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming in the hottest part of the day. I'll introduce Esterino Adami, professor at the University of Turin and a writer about Indian writers in English. Real pleasure to be here and to introduce you.
Thank you very much for these words. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and in particular to be in this session in which we have the pleasure of having a chance of talking with one of the most original writers from India, Jeet Thayil. We know that Jeet Thayil is a writer, a poet, a musician, so he's a kind of artist complete in a sense. And his new book, his collection of poems, I'll have it here, is just out. So perhaps we can start with some questions about this book. Jeet, we know that even if your last collection of poems was in 2008, you never abandoned poetry. But why now we have this book? What brought you to produce this new book of poems?
When I wrote the last book, These Errors Are Correct in 2008, or when it was published in 2008, I wouldn't say that I abandoned poetry. I felt like poetry had abandoned me because there were no poems coming and I was writing fiction.
Right.
And then something happened. I think the pandemic had something to do with it, and certainly India's political climate had something to do with it.
Yeah.
And you know, extended periods of solitude probably had something to do with it. And I was very grateful to receive poems again.
Right.
You know, after a long kind of arid time. And you know, if you receive a poem, if you get that gift kind of falling into your lap, all you can do is quickly make a record of it.
Yeah.
So these poems, I think, were written over the last 4 years.
Good, good. And talking about poetry and poems, would you like to tell us something about the type of language that you use in this collection? Because people sometimes think that poems are very difficult, they're very technical, they are distant from reality. Instead, I think that this book is a sort of meditation on life, because you touch upon a number of issues, a number of references and so on. So how about the language, the style, the linguistic form?
I think actually about the language in this book as post-language. You know, it's more post-language than language.
Right.
Yeah, because there are some poems where the actual language is secondary to the mood.
Good.
And also there are some poems where the language is used in a very mocking, self-mocking way, where there are words that are misspelled, for example, for the rhyme. And you read it and you think, okay, this poet's having me on.
Yeah.
He's, you know, mocking himself, but he's also mocking me as the reader. I don't think it's mockery exactly. It's maybe a sense of humor, which for me is a new thing. I have to admit.
Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. So you were speaking about rhymes and rhyme in a poetic language. Do you have a favorite type of verse, or do you think that poets can select their own favorite kinds of verse?
I love form. You know, I think there's a reason the sonnet has stayed with us for 600 years. There's a reason the canzone has been with us since Dante.
Yeah.
There's a reason those forms have stayed, because there's something about rhyme and rhythm,
Right.
which it's similar to song, you know, and it makes it easy to remember.
Yeah.
The rhyme makes
Yeah.
lines easy to remember.
Yes.
And when you're writing it, the thing about a strict form is
Yeah.
that it's actually a kind of liberation. You think it's a stricture, you think it's a prison, but actually it's freedom, because if you have two lines, for example, and you have the rhyme in those two lines, you know what the rest of the stanza will be. If it's a sonnet, you know that there's going to be 4 lines in that stanza. You know what the rhymes of the next 2 lines will be. And basically what happens is that poem writes itself if it's a strict form. And it's a paradox that strict forms allow the widest kind of latitude, the greatest type of freedom within this cage that you've constructed yourself.
Yeah, very good, very interesting. And how about music? Because what you say perhaps also applies to music. I mean, if you have to write a song, for example, how would you manipulate the language? What kind of effects would you like to create in the people who want to hear your songs?
When I write a song, I should probably not say this, but I think it's true with most songwriters. When you write a song, the words don't matter as much as they do
Yeah.
when it's on a page.
Yeah.
You know, because there's so many other things that help those words. There's the live performance on a stage. There's the music, the instrumentation, the melody,
Yeah.
the beat,
Yeah.
and the words. I really don't give them that much importance.
Right.
I will change anything. I will take out
Yeah.
things, you know, add things just for the rhythm.
Yeah.
Things that I would never do with a poem.
Yes.
You know, you do with a
Yes.
song because it's not that you don't take it as seriously. It's just that there are other tools
Yeah.
that are at your command. So you give those parts of a song as much importance as the words.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So perhaps poetry is a sort of more subjective experience. The reader in front of the book, in front of the page, has some engagement with the lines, whilst with music it's a more complex experience because you have music, you have performance, you have different means, so different stimulations in a sense. So these poems and this book is a sort of a multi-voiced text because we have a number of very large references. We have a mention of Gandhi, we have a mention of Baudelaire, of course. There is a quote from the Beastie Boys. So many different characters, figures, references, voices. Would you like to say something about this?
It's, you know, it's, for example, sometimes I get the question, what do you prefer, poetry or fiction? And how come you started to write fiction when you were a poet?
Yeah.
And I really don't think of myself in with those labels. I just think if you're a writer
Yeah.
and you write every day,
Yeah.
at some point you're going to get bored with one,
Right.
you know, type of writing.
Yeah.
So when it's all there and you can write in a different form or a different language, why wouldn't you try it?
Yeah.
You know, I think, I mean, if that's an answer.
Right, of course it is, yeah. Yes, maybe we can hear a poet reading poems, so you can start perhaps with some lines.
I'll read the first poem from the book, which kind of illustrates what I was talking about with rhymes.
Good.
And how sometimes the rhyme takes precedence over, in fact, creates its own meaning.
Right.
Yeah. This is called diminishing marginal utility, which the economic students in the room will instantly recognize as a phrase from economics. The poem kind of explains what it means. Diminishing marginal utility. The first cigarette is all you've got. From the second, it's a downhill trot. You might as well not smoke it. So little does it satisfy. You might as well stroke it like a pet, sniff it, and say, oh my. This is the law of farm, forest, and city. Rapidly diminishing marginal utility, once learned, never forgotten, applicable, alas, to everything. Kisses, earthquakes, the nobly rotten, cars, guitars, bliss on the wing. Sunsets on Mars are blue, sometimes purple too. An octopus dreaming changes color from pale yellow to camo to black. Its suckers light up, synapses follow. It has a large brain and a knack for the avoidance of pain. I'll never eat octopus again. Utility doesn't always diminish in value. It can start at the bottom of the graph, never to rise, never to accrue gains or losses. Go ahead and laugh. Thank you.
A beautiful poem and a beautiful reading. Yeah. Let me add a provocative question. Since we live in very complex times, accelerated times, mad times also, why do you think people should need poems? Because most of us, or most people in general, for a reason or another, tend to read stories or narratives on their computer, etc. But why poems? Why are poems still important? And I believe that, of course.
I've noticed that whenever there's a moment of national crisis, when there's a natural disaster or an unnatural disaster in a country, if you're living there, like for example, I was living in New York working as a journalist during 9/11, and in the months following 9/11, I was shocked to see poems in the pages of the newspapers where there had never been poems. For example, in the New York Times, in the edit pages, there were poems. And you find this happening during times of crisis anywhere, and certainly in your own life. We go to poems for the same reason we go to prayer. It's a source of comfort, and it's a very private and personal source of comfort. And it's something that reaches out from the past or the future and touches you where you live as a human. And this is why poems will always be with us. And the reason that we admire and revere and love poets is because it is the only activity, or certainly one of the only activities on this planet that you can say is done without any thought of money. Right? If there's a poet who writes poetry for money, they're out of their minds. You know. Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing. You have to revere that, I think.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
there will always be those crazy people among us who write not for money or fame, because, you know, if poets ever get money, it's so late that they don't know what to do with it. If they get fame, it's so late they don't care about it. You know, it's something to admire, unlike novelists.
Yes, yeah. Would you like to read another poem, or?
I'm going to read a poem because I'm in Kerala. I'm going to read a couple of poems, which if I were to read in Jaipur or Delhi, I might have slippers thrown at me. The great thing about Kerala is this will never happen.
Wow.
We're kind of, speaking as a Malayali, we're a little more open-minded. This is a poem called A Kind of Anthem. A nation you thought you knew, from Ashoka to Buddha to Gandhi to Nehru, in a single decade unravels into Muslim, Christian, Hindu. Unholy trinity of saffron, green, and blue on a field of British white. My girlfriend's Chinese. My baby mama's a Jew. My husband's red, white, and blue. When we're out on the toot in Chikmagalur, Dew, and Kathmandu, there's no jealousy or rue. We try to eat right. We like our new brew. We float past our differences and accrue credit for the next bardo, our karmic due. Either way, it's true. We're dead if we don't, and dead if we do. Got a light?
That was great.
Thanks so much. And this is called The Ghost of Mr. Great Soul, which, if you translate into Hindi, Great Soul, Hindi speakers? Come on now. Mahatma, of course. So, The Ghost of Mr. Great Soul. Why, if it isn't Gandhi? Returned as a house gecko, talkative, still slender, motionless on the wainscoting. His chirp is plummy British banter. Dear boy, have a deco. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Or so you'll find. Mind, one hopes not. And so on and so forth. All I say to him is, what? I don't mean to be rude, but you left us no food. The carving knife you used, like some tiny god, still drips blood on the old floorboard. My extended, hopeless family sat down for dinner in India and got up in Pakistan. You turned our house into a granary, the army used for bribes to win over the strongest tribes. 75 is 70 years, give or take 5 years. You expect things to change, but what has? Well, we pray to screens. And they're still at it, your assassins, in the name of love and fame. A people divided by circumcision, or not. Veils or not, meat or not. You expect things to change the same. Mr. Gecko, Mr. Forget-Me-Not, Mr. Great Soul. You're here and you're not.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it seems to me that very frequently in your writing, both fictional and poetic, you deal with a number of very sensitive topics about identity, about gender, about the political situation, and so on. What is your attitude in this respect? How can you deal with such complicated topics? You were mentioning the fact that in Kerala, people are more open-minded, so you can perhaps touch on or discuss certain topics that in other parts of the country or in other contexts would not be possible. How do you approach this thing?
I think the most fatal thing a writer, whether poet or novelist, can do is to think about their audience before or while they're writing, because that can really kind of cripple you. I think you write for yourself, and you write for some friends, and you write for the ghosts that are peering over your shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, the writers that you admire who are probably dead.
Yeah.
And that's what you do. And then eventually, like for example, with this book, there are poems that I didn't include in this volume because they didn't fit, or I didn't, in a couple of cases, I didn't have the courage to include them. You know, Yeah, you
Yeah.
just write it when it comes to you and then wait for the rest of it to take care of itself, I think.
I see,
Yeah.
I see. So perhaps these poems you left out will be included in another collection.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yeah, well, who knows? Okay, maybe we can have some questions from the floor. If, yeah. Are there any questions? Well, there are questions, yes. Can you please pass the microphone? Plenty of questions.
Hello, sir. Could you please explain in simple layman terms the difference between free verse, blank verse, and prose poetry? And if you want to choose among these three, which one would you choose personally and why?
Which three again?
Free verse, blank verse, and prose poetry.
Well, you know, free verse is not free. Blank verse is not blank.
Yes.
And
yes,
post poetry is not post.
that's it.
So I wouldn't believe those labels. It's poetry or it's not.
Other questions? In the back, please.
Hi, sir. A huge fan of your words and your wordsmithness. My question is, so in India, English is not a mother tongue. It comes second to our mother tongue. So to get the musicality of our mother tongue is very easy. But to get the musicality or the sonorous aspect of a second language is quite tough. So if you take poetry of Meena Kandasamy or Aravind Krishnamehrotra for that matter, we can see that rather than the form, the idea is foregrounded, rather than the language. Like language aspect is there, but if you read it out aloud, will we get that sonorous aspect is quite doubtful. We read English poetry, we don't read it aloud in India, usually. So when you write poetry, do you foreground your idea, or through diction, do you foreground the sonorous aspect of the language, or do you take a middle ground?
With poetry and with fiction, when I write, I read it aloud in my head. And with poetry, I very often actually physically read it aloud at some point during the composition and the editing of it. Because with poetry, you really need to know what it sounds like. About the mother tongue debate, Indian poets who write in English have been dealing with this question for something like 200 years, at least. And it still hasn't been resolved, and we still get these criticisms. Although less these days, because now poets who write in other languages are being translated much more than they used to be. So we hear less of that kind of sniping that we used to a lot a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
And always the question is a question of authenticity. As if you write in English, you're not authentic. As if you're talking about food, you know, a certain kind of cuisine served in a certain restaurant, and you say, oh, this is not authentic because, you know, it didn't use certain spices. The thing is, in my case, and I'm not the only one, there are many poets like me who write in English because that's the language that they think in and dream in and sing in. In my case, my mother tongue is not my mother's tongue. My mother tongue is English. My mother's tongue is Malayalam. She always spoke to me in Malayalam, and I always spoke back in English. My father spoke in English. I spoke back in English.
Right.
So,
Right.
for me, that's as authentic as it gets, you know.
Yes.
So the whole idea of the mother tongue really, I think at this point, is obsolete, irrelevant. Maybe here the word post applies. You know, we are post mother tongues, though we're certainly not post mothers.
Yeah.
That brings to me the question. You were using post language. Could you please elaborate what is that post language? Thanks.
Sure. What I meant by that was there's certain usages of English in this book which mocks its own, it's ironic, and it mocks its own diction and its own kind of use of a certain grammarly kind of English. Pokes fun at it. So a way of describing that would be to call it post-language.
If I may add a quick note as an outsider, of course, I think that the Indian English writers have completely appropriated and abrogated the language. So for me, appropriating and abrogated the language. I mean, for me, English in India is a native language by now. It's an Indian language, so that's why we have such a beautiful literature and poetry by Indian writers.
We've been saying this for decades.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one last question. It's 59
Yes.
seconds.
A very quick question, please.
55 seconds.
Yes.
52 seconds.
Yes. The countdown
hi,
is
sir.
on.
49 seconds.
No, please stop timing. My name is Lakshmi, and I was actually given the pleasure of having one of your poems. I found it in Chennai. Actually, I took it from a co-worker of mine, and I forgot to return it. So I really hope that you could get it signed for me, please. But my question to you is, and I wrote it down so I don't forget it, how do you make your poems sound different? Like, what does authenticity mean to you? Because poetry, like any other art form, is oftentimes about reflection, right? A reflection. Can you not hear me? Is it better now?
You're moving the mic, so
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
yeah,
Okay.
that's much better.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. How do you make your poems sound different? You know, what does authenticity mean to you? Because poetry, like any other art form, has been about reflection, reflection of your inner and external world, and you're very well read, right? Like you've mentioned, sometimes you're writing for someone. There's the ghosts of past writers weighing over your shoulder. So how much has your poetry been about that, been about imitation or reflection and all of that, please?
Thanks for that question, thoughtful question, but that's the kind of question that if I answer, I'm going to be messing with the source of the poems. There are some things you shouldn't question. You can question it when it comes to other people, but when it comes to your own work, you probably shouldn't tinker with the source of it, because then you're tinkering with the magic that actually makes a poem. So those are questions, the question that you asked, or the questions that you ask, are really questions that other people should answer and not me. Thanks for picking up English. That edition is now out of print, by the way.
So I think we have to finish this session, but I would like to thank Jeet Thayil for his time and his insightful words. So thank you very much for this session, and of course thank you very much to Kerala Literature Festival for having organized this event.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much
once again.
to KLF and to Esterino and to all of you for coming. Thank you.